It was the kind of morning that made you feel like the world could end, but nobody had the courtesy to send you the memo. I was standing at the edge of an old pier in Monterey Bay, watching the waves roll in with a strange rhythm, like they were trying to tell me something. That's the thing about the ocean, always talking, never saying. Now I'm not much for poetry, but there's something about the way the salt hangs in the air here, sharp enough to sting, that stirs up the ghosts. My name's Rogers, Captain Rogers. Used to be a soldier. The kind they send to solve problems the rest of the world likes to pretend don't exist. These days, I call myself an explorer. But let me tell you folks, sometimes the things you find out here aren't meant to be found. It started 2 weeks ago when a man named Elias showed up at my front door. Tall, dark hair, eyes that didn't quite match the way his mouth smiled. Said he worked for some think tank studying oceanic anomalies. I should have sent him packing right then. But curiosity, she's a cruel mistress, isn't she? Elias laid it out plain. Strange disappearances, odd weather patterns, and a sharp rise in seismic activity centered deep in the Pacific. "Something's brewing out there, Captain," he said, his voice smooth like the whiskey I keep for special occasions. "And we need someone like you to find out what." Well, I'd been out of the game long enough that the itch to do something stupid was getting unbearable. So I signed on. Big mistake. By the time we were 200 miles off the coast, it was clear this was no ordinary research expedition. The crew was too clean, too precise, like actors playing sailors. They didn't joke, didn't curse, and sure as hell didn't look seasick. Then there was the tech, the kind of equipment you don't find in your run-of-the-mill science lab. What do you think, folks? Should I have bailed right there, or was I right to push further? The answer came a few nights later, during my watch. That's when I saw them, Elias and 2 others, standing at the bow, their faces lit by a faint green glow. They were chanting in a language I'd never heard before, something that didn't belong to this world. And then it happened. The ocean answered. A column of water shot up into the sky, spinning like a tornado. It shimmered with a light that seemed alive, pulsing, searching. For a moment, I was frozen, caught between running for my life and watching history rewrite itself. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The next morning, Elias called a meeting. "We're close," he said, pacing the deck like a man possessed. "The artifact is here. We can feel it. Artifact?" That's when the pieces started falling into place. This wasn't about studying the ocean. They were looking for something. And the ocean, she wasn't just letting them take it. So, what would you do in my boots? Play along, or start planning an escape route? I decided to stick around, at least for a while longer. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this. The truth doesn't hide in the light. It waits in the shadows, whispering, daring you to come find it. And me? I've never been one to back down from a dare. The next morning, I made it my mission to keep Elias in my sights. He was like a ticking bomb, one that only I seemed to notice. The crew, if you could call them that, moved with an eerie synchronicity, responding to his commands as if they were of one mind. It made my skin crawl. Our ship, the Eurybia, was outfitted with tech so advanced it could have been a prototype straight out of DARPA. Underwater drones, spectral imaging devices, and something called an oceanic destabilizer, a name that screamed bad news, I pretended to understand what it all did, but let's face it, I'm a boots-on-the-ground guy, not a lab rat. By noon, Elias had us parked in the middle of a vast, seemingly endless blue. "We'll deploy the drones here," he announced, his voice carrying over the deck like a sermon. "The artifact is within range." I leaned against the railing, squinting at the horizon. "Care to explain what we're dealing with, Elias? Or is this another need-to-know kind of mission?" He turned to me, that too-perfect smile stretched across his face. "Curiosity killed the cat, Captain," he said, but his eyes were anything but amused. "But since you're so eager to know, what we're looking for isn't of this world." That hit me like a sucker punch. "You mean alien?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Inside, my mind was racing. Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "Not in the way you think. It's more of an energy source, a fragment of something ancient and infinite. Something that could power civilizations or end them. I glanced at the crew. No one flinched. No one questioned him. It was like he'd just told them what was for dinner. "And what happens when we find it?" I pressed. His smile faltered. "That depends," he said softly, almost to himself, "on how cooperative the ocean decides to be." Cooperative? I didn't like the sound of that. By nightfall, the drones had returned, bringing back footage that made my stomach twist. The seabed wasn't just shifting, it was alive. Pulsing veins of light crisscrossed the ocean floor, illuminating jagged, unnatural structures buried beneath centuries of sediment. And at the center of it all was something. A sphere, faintly glowing, as if it were breathing. "That's it," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with reverence. "The core. The core." Even the name sounded like trouble. As they reviewed the footage, I snuck below deck. There had to be records, logs, something that would explain what I'd gotten myself into. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Maps of the ocean, each marked with red zones, areas where life had mysteriously vanished. Reports of strange weather patterns, ships disappearing, and marine life dying en masse. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. They weren't just searching for the core. They were destroying everything in their way to get to it. Later that night, I found Elias alone in the control room, staring at the footage. "You know, Captain," he said without turning, "the ocean holds more secrets than humanity could ever dream of. It's a shame, really, that we've squandered its gifts." "What's your endgame, Elias?" I asked, stepping into the room. "You don't strike me as a save the whales kind of guy." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. His eyes weren't just cold, they were alien. "You're right," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm not here to save. I'm here to claim what was lost." I backed away, reaching for the knife I always kept tucked at my hip. "Who the hell are you?" "Not who," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "What?" Before I could react, the ship shuddered violently, throwing me against the wall. Alarms blared as the crew rushed to their stations. Elias didn't flinch. He simply turned to the monitor, where the core was now glowing brighter than ever, its light piercing the darkness of the ocean floor. "It's awake," he said, almost gleefully, "and it's calling us. So what do you think? Should I confront Elias head-on or play along until I learn more? Let me know before I dive into Chapter 3, where the stakes are going to get even higher." The ship groaned under the pressure of the sudden turbulence. Outside, the waves churned like something had stirred the ocean's very soul. I staggered to my feet, my knife still clenched in one hand, and locked eyes with Elias. The smirk on his face made my blood run cold. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I growled, steadying myself against the bulkhead. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to the monitor, where the core was now radiating waves of energy, each pulse rippling through the water like a heartbeat. "The core is alive," he said, his voice filled with an almost childlike wonder. "It's not just an artifact. It's a sentinel, a key to a greater power." "And you woke it up," I said, the realization hitting me like a freight train. "It was never asleep," he replied, his tone cool. "It was waiting." For a moment, I considered driving my knife right into his chest, but something told me it wouldn't make a difference. Elias wasn't entirely human. That much was clear, and if the rest of the crew shared his origins, I was badly outnumbered. "Captain," one of the crew shouted from the deck above, "you need to see this." I shot Elias a glare before heading topside. The scene that greeted me was straight out of a nightmare. The water around the ship had turned a phosphorescent green, glowing with an unnatural light. Tendrils of energy snaked across the waves, converging on the ship like it was their beacon. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. "It's reacting to us," Elias said calmly, stepping up beside me. "It recognizes its own." "Its own?" I echoed, my stomach sinking. "You're not human, are you?" Elias chuckled. "Not entirely. My kind has walked among yours for centuries, guiding, observing. But we're not the invaders you think we are, Captain. We're custodians." "Custodians of what?" I snapped. He turned his gaze to the glowing water, of balance, and the core is the ultimate equalizer. Before I could press him further, the ocean erupted. A column of water shot skyward, shimmering with the same eerie light as the core. From its center emerged a shape, massive, otherworldly, and unmistakably alive. It looked like a cross between a manta ray and a leviathan, its translucent body pulsing with the same energy as the core. The crew fell to their knees, bowing their heads in unison. I stood frozen, torn between awe and terror. "What is that?" I whispered. Elias didn't bow. Instead, he stepped forward, his arms outstretched. "A guardian," he said. "One of many. They were created to protect the core, to ensure it never fell into the wrong hands." "And whose hands are the right ones?" I shot back. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "That depends on who's willing to pay the price." The Guardian hovered above the ship, its glowing eyes fixed on us. Then, as if on cue, the core began to rise from the ocean floor. The light grew blinding, forcing me to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the core was hovering just above the water's surface, its energy crackling like a storm. "This is it," Elias said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the waves. "The source of infinite energy, the key to reshaping entire worlds." "And what happens to this world?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The devastation in the surrounding waters spoke for itself. Fish floated belly up, their bodies glowing faintly. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone. Whatever the core was, it wasn't meant for this planet. "You're going to destroy everything," I said, stepping closer to him. "The oceans, the ecosystem. Humanity can't survive without them." "Humanity has had its chance," Elias replied coldly. "This planet is a stepping stone, nothing more." I tightened my grip on the knife. "Not on my watch." Before I could make a move, the Guardian let out a deafening screech. The sound reverberated through my skull, forcing me to my knees. When I looked up, the core was glowing brighter than ever, its energy expanding outward like a shockwave. The ship shuddered violently, and I realized we were being pulled toward it. Elias remained unfazed, his eyes locked on the core. "It's choosing," he murmured. "The core is deciding who's worthy." "Worthy of what?" I shouted, struggling to stay on my feet. "To wield its power," he said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "And to survive." Before I could respond, the Guardian let out another ear-piercing screech. The light around the core dimmed, shifting to a deep, ominous red. The air grew heavy, and the ocean around us began to churn violently. "What's happening?" I demanded, my eyes darting to Elias. He frowned, his confidence faltering for the first time. "The core. It's rejecting something." The ship lurched as the energy around the core erupted, sending shockwaves through the water. I was thrown to the deck, the impact knocking the wind out of me. When I looked up, I saw the crew writhing on the ground, their forms flickering like static on an old TV screen. "What the hell?" I started, but the words caught in my throat as I realized the truth. They weren't human, not entirely. Their disguises were unraveling, revealing shimmering insect-like exoskeletons beneath. Elias staggered, his face contorted with rage. "No, this isn't right. We are the chosen." "Doesn't look like the core agrees," I said, pushing myself to my feet. The Guardian descended, its glowing eyes fixed on Elias. He raised his hands as if to plead, but the creature wasn't interested in negotiations. A beam of light shot from its body, striking him square in the chest. He screamed, his form flickering violently before collapsing into a heap on the deck. The core's light dimmed further, its energy receding like the tide. The ship steadied, the ocean falling silent once more. I approached the core cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. It hovered just above the water, its surface smooth and glassy, like a perfect black pearl. "What now?" I murmured, half expecting it to answer. And then it did. Not with words, but with a feeling. A surge of energy coursed through me, filling me with a strange, overwhelming clarity. Images flooded my mind. Stars being born, worlds thriving, civilizations rising and falling. The core wasn't just a source of power. It was a story, a history of the universe, preserved in its infinite energy. I reached out, my fingers just brushing its surface. For a moment, I felt everything, the weight of existence, the fragility of life. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The core sank beneath the waves, its light extinguished. The Guardian followed, disappearing into the depths without a sound. The crew, what was left of them, lay motionless on the deck, their forms slowly dissolving into ash. And Elias? He was gone, leaving nothing behind but the faint, acrid smell of burned ozone. I stood there alone as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The ocean was calm again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had changed. The core had made its choice. And for better or worse, it had chosen to leave humanity to its own devices. Dawn broke over a still and silent sea, but the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. The Eurybia, though still afloat, felt like a ghost ship. The crew was gone, their forms having disintegrated into nothingness. Only I remained, standing alone on the deck as the first light of morning painted the horizon. The core was gone, but its presence lingered. I could feel it, a faint hum in the back of my mind, like a melody I couldn't quite place. It had shown me things, given me a glimpse of truths far greater than I could comprehend. And then it had left, sinking back into the depths, like it was never meant to be found. I scanned the empty deck. The equipment was intact, but there was no sign of Elias or his alien companions, just piles of ash where they had stood. The Guardian had judged them, rejected them, and erased them. It wasn't mercy, it was a warning. I made my way to the control room, hoping to find some answers among the ship's logs. The systems were still operational, though many of the files had been corrupted, likely by the core's energy surge. I sifted through what remained, piecing together fragments of Elias's mission. The core wasn't just a power source, it was a safeguard. A relic left behind by an ancient civilization to preserve balance in the galaxy. Its energy was infinite, yes, but its purpose was far more complex. It wasn't meant to be controlled, not by humans, not by anyone. Elias and his crew, if I could still call them that, had come here to claim it, to bend it to their will. They believed they were entitled to its power, that they could use it to reshape the world in their image. But the core had seen through them. It had seen their greed, their arrogance, and it had deemed them unworthy. I leaned back in the captain's chair, staring at the flickering monitors. "What about me?" I muttered to no one in particular. "Why didn't it take me too?" The ship's radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Captain Rogers, this is the Coast Guard cutter Polaris. We've been tracking your vessel's distress signal. Are you in need of assistance?" I hesitated, my hand hovering over the transmitter. How could I explain what had happened here? How could I tell them about the core, about Elias, about the Guardian without sounding insane? "Captain Rogers, do you copy?" The voice repeated, more urgent this time. I pressed the button. "This is Rogers. I'm the only one left. Send a recovery team." By the time the Polaris arrived, the Eurybia was adrift. I stood on the deck as the recovery team boarded, their expressions a mix of relief and confusion. They asked questions: what had happened, where the crew was, why the ship looked like it had been through a war. I gave them the sanitized version: an accident, a mutiny, an explosion. Enough to satisfy their reports, but not enough to get me locked up. They didn't press further. Maybe they saw the look in my eyes, the weight of what I wasn't saying. Or maybe they just didn't want to know. Back on shore, I tried to return to normalcy, but normal wasn't an option anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the core, felt its energy coursing through me. It had left something behind, a spark, a fragment of its infinite power. I could feel it, just out of reach, like a whisper in the back of my mind. What did it mean? Why had it chosen me to survive? I didn't have answers, only questions that kept me up at night. But one thing was clear: the core wasn't done with me. Not yet. Weeks passed, but the ocean was restless. Reports of strange anomalies began to surface. Unexplained weather patterns, marine life migrating in bizarre, unprecedented ways, and seismic activity far beyond anything the region had ever experienced. The core's awakening had left a mark, one that couldn't be ignored. And then there were the whispers. Not literal voices, but a growing sense that something was out there, watching, waiting. The core had gone back into hiding, but its guardians were still out there, and so were others like Elias. They wouldn't stop looking. They wouldn't stop coming. So here I am, folks, standing at the edge of the world, staring out at an ocean that holds more secrets than any of us could imagine. The core is out there, somewhere, and I know it's only a matter of time before it calls again. The question is, when it does, will we be ready? Or will we make the same mistakes, driven by greed and ambition instead of wisdom and restraint? What do you think? Can humanity rise to the challenge, or are we doomed to repeat our failures? Let me know before we move into Chapter 6, where the next chapter of this strange and dangerous journey begins. The ocean didn't look the same anymore. Even from my perch on the California coast, the waves seemed different, unsettled, restless, as if they carried a message too big, too ancient, for anyone to understand. It wasn't just the waves, though. Something had shifted in the world, and I could feel it in my bones. After my return, I tried to bury myself in the mundane, daily routines, keeping my head down, even volunteering at a local maritime museum to kill time. But you don't come face to face with something like the core and just walk away. It leaves a scar, not on your body, but deep in your soul. Weeks turned into months, and I convinced myself that the storm had passed. The core had gone silent, the guardian had disappeared, and no one came asking questions. I thought I could put it behind me, maybe even move on. But then, the disappearances started. It began with fishing vessels, small ones at first, boats that would head out into the Pacific and never come back. Then it was larger ships, freighters, tankers, vanishing without a trace. The Coast Guard launched investigations, but they came up empty every time. No debris, no wreckage, nothing. Just empty seas where there should have been something. At first I told myself it was coincidence, a natural disaster, or even human error. But deep down, I knew better. The core's ripple effect was starting to show, and I couldn't ignore it. One night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey, my radio crackled to life. It was an old piece of junk I'd salvaged from the Eurybia, something I kept out of morbid curiosity. It hadn't made a sound since the day I brought it home. Until now. The static buzzed and hissed, and then, through the noise, came a voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. "Captain Rogers, do you hear us?" I nearly dropped the glass. My heart raced as I leaned in closer, adjusting the dials. "Who is this?" I demanded. "You must return," the voice said, fragmented but urgent. The core, the guardians, are not alone. They are calling others. The line went dead, leaving only static behind. I didn't sleep that night. The voice played over and over in my head, gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Was it a warning? A threat? Or something else entirely? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever, or whatever, had sent that message wasn't far away. The next morning, I made my decision. If the core was calling, if something out there was answering, I couldn't sit on the sidelines. I packed what little I had, rented a beat-up fishing boat, and set off into the Pacific. It wasn't much of a plan, but plans didn't matter anymore. Instinct was all I had left. The ocean was calm at first, deceptively so, but as I ventured further out, the air grew thick, heavy with a tension I couldn't explain. The water took on a strange, iridescent hue, shimmering like liquid light. It was beautiful, but it set my nerves on edge. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw it. A glow beneath the surface, faint at first but growing stronger with every passing second. It wasn't the core, but it was something connected to it. Something alive. Before I could react, the boat lurched violently, nearly throwing me overboard. A massive shape rose from the depths, its translucent body shimmering with the same energy I'd seen in the core. But this wasn't a guardian. It was something darker. Its eyes glowed red, and its movements were erratic, aggressive. I scrambled for the controls, trying to steer the boat away, but it was no use. The creature was faster, stronger, and it was hunting me. The creature rose higher from the water, its form towering over the fishing boat like a nightmare-given shape. It wasn't just massive, it was wrong. Its translucent body pulsed with an eerie red light, veins of energy coursing through it like molten lava. Eyes that glowed like twin embers locked onto me, and for a moment I was paralyzed. Then instinct kicked in. I spun the wheel hard to port, sending the boat lurching away from the creature. The engine roared as I pushed it to its limits, but the thing was fast, too fast. It dove beneath the surface, disappearing into the black water, and for a moment the only sound was the pounding of my own heart. Then it struck. The boat shuddered violently as the creature rammed it from below, nearly capsizing us. I grabbed onto the console to steady myself, my mind racing. There was no outrunning this thing. It was toying with me, like a predator playing with its prey. "All right, you bastard," I muttered, reaching for the flare gun strapped to the console. "Let's see how you like this." The creature surfaced again, its glowing eyes locking onto me as it let out a deafening roar. I raised the flare gun, aiming for the center of its head, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a hiss, striking the creature square in its translucent body. It let out a screech, the red glow in its veins flickering as it recoiled. For a brief moment, I thought I'd scared it off. But then it dove again, this time circling the boat like a shark. I could feel the water churning beneath me, the boat rocking violently with each pass. The creature wasn't retreating. It was getting ready to strike again. I had seconds, maybe less, to make a decision. Running wasn't an option, and the flare gun wouldn't do enough damage to stop it. That's when I remembered the equipment I'd salvaged from the Eurybia. Among the crates in the hold was a portable energy destabilizer, a piece of tech I didn't fully understand but knew packed a punch. I scrambled below deck, nearly losing my footing as the boat rocked again. The destabilizer was tucked away in a metal case, its sleek, alien design a stark contrast to the rough wooden planks around it. I yanked it free, fumbling with the controls as I tried to remember how Elias had used it. The device hummed to life, its core glowing faintly. I had no idea what it would do to the creature, or to me, but I didn't have a choice. Clutching the destabilizer, I made my way back to the deck. The creature surfaced again, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It let out another roar, its body coiling like a spring as it prepared to lunge. I raised the destabilizer, aiming it directly at the beast, and pressed the trigger. A beam of energy shot out, striking the creature in the chest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The red light in its veins flared bright, then dimmed, as if the destabilizer was disrupting its very essence. The creature let out a final, anguished screech before collapsing back into the water, its massive form sinking into the depths. I stood there, shaking, the destabilizer still humming in my hands. The water around the boat was eerily calm, the glow from the creature fading into darkness. For a moment I thought it was over. Then I felt it, a vibration beneath my feet, faint but growing stronger. The glow returned, not red this time, but blue, spreading through the water like veins of lightning. The core. It was awake again, and it wasn't happy. The fishing boat began to drift, pulled by an unseen current. I tried to steer us back toward the coast, but the controls were unresponsive. The core's energy was drawing me in, pulling me toward its source like a moth to a flame. "Guess there's no turning back now," I muttered, gripping the wheel as the boat plunged into the glowing abyss. The pull was relentless. The fishing boat, battered but afloat, drifted deeper into the glowing waters, drawn by a force that felt almost sentient. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to resist, but I knew it was pointless. The core wasn't just pulling me physically, it was reaching into my mind, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a vice. I let go of the wheel, watching as the glow beneath the surface grew stronger, illuminating the waves in an otherworldly blue. There was no escape, only the unknown. The descent felt endless. The boat seemed weightless now, gliding across the water like it was caught in a current that defied the laws of nature. Around me, the ocean came alive. Shapes moved in the depths, vast, translucent forms that glowed faintly in the core's light. Guardians, or something like them. They didn't attack, but their presence was suffocating, watching, waiting. And then I saw it, the core. It rose from the depths like a second sun, its light pulsating in waves that rippled through the water and into my very soul. It was larger than I'd imagined, a sphere of pure liquid energy, its surface shifting and flowing like molten glass. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. The boat came to a stop, floating just above the core. I stood on the deck, staring down at it, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The source of infinite energy, the relic that had destroyed Elias and his crew. And now, it had brought me here. "What do you want?" I whispered, unsure if I was speaking to the core or to myself. The answer came not in words, but in images. Memories flashed before my eyes, not mine, but something older, far older. I saw civilizations rising and falling, worlds consumed by their own greed, their own ambition. And I saw the core, always at the center, a silent witness to it all. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a test, a challenge, a mirror that reflected the truth of whoever stood before it. The images shifted, and I saw something else, an object, buried deep beneath the ocean floor. It was massive, ancient, and radiating the same energy as the core. A vessel, perhaps, or a machine. Whatever it wasn't from Earth. The core's energy pulsed again, stronger this time, and I understood. The object was a key, a piece of something far greater, and the core wanted me to find it. "Why me?" I asked aloud. "I'm just one man. What can I do?" The core didn't answer, but the pull in my chest grew stronger. It wasn't a demand, it was a choice. To turn back and let the world face the consequences alone, or to embrace the unknown and uncover the truth. The boat began to move again, this time descending toward the glowing sphere. The air grew thick with energy, each pulse sending shivers through my body. As the core drew closer, I felt my mind unraveling, my thoughts blurring into fragments. It was too much, too vast, too infinite, and then, just as I thought I would be consumed, the core stopped. A voice echoed in my mind, deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Prove your worth, Captain Rogers, or perish." The water erupted around me and the Guardians appeared once more, their translucent forms glowing brighter than ever. They surrounded the boat, their movements synchronized like dancers in an otherworldly ballet. This wasn't an attack, it was a trial. I reached for the destabilizer, still strapped to my back, and steadied myself. Whatever this was, I wasn't going down without a fight. What do you think, folks? Should I fight the Guardians head on, or try to understand their movements and work with them to uncover the core's true purpose? Let me know before I dive into Chapter 9, where the trial will reveal whether I'm worthy or doomed. The Guardians moved like shadows in water, their translucent bodies swirling around the boat in a hypnotic dance. Their light pulsed in unison with the core, casting eerie patterns across the deck. They weren't attacking, not yet, but the tension was palpable. This was no idle display. It was a challenge. The core's words echoed in my mind. "Prove your worth, Captain Rogers, or perish." "All right then," I muttered, gripping the destabilizer tightly. "Let's see what you've got." The first Guardian broke formation, lunging toward the boat with breathtaking speed. I raised the destabilizer and fired, the beam striking it dead center. The creature's body flickered, its light dimming for a moment, but it didn't stop. It veered away at the last second, circling back to rejoin the others. This wasn't an attack, it was a test. I lowered the destabilizer, watching as the Guardians resumed their pattern. Their movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if they were trying to communicate. It wasn't aggression, it was something else. A puzzle. "All right, folks," I said aloud, more to myself than to anyone. "What's the play here? Fight or figure this out?" The Guardians formed a circle around the boat, their lights pulsing faster. One by one, they began to emit a low hum, the sound resonating deep in my chest. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm, I closed my eyes, focusing on the sound, letting it wash over me. It wasn't just noise, it was a message. The core was testing my ability to understand, to connect. It wasn't about brute strength or firepower. It was about proving that I could see beyond the surface, that I could adapt. "All right," I said, lowering the destabilizer completely. "Let's do this your way." I stood at the edge of the deck watching as the Guardians shifted their positions. Their movements created symbols in the water, glowing shapes that pulsed in time with the hum. The symbols were alien but strangely familiar, like a language I'd once known but had long forgotten. One symbol stood out, a circle divided into 4 quadrants, each glowing a different color. It hovered in the water directly below the core, its light intensifying with each pulse. I stepped to the railing, gripping it tightly. "Is this what you want me to do?" I asked, not expecting an answer. The core pulsed once, its light flaring briefly before dimming again. A confirmation. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small handheld device I'd taken from the Eurybia. It was a translator designed to decode alien languages. I activated it, aiming it at the glowing symbol. The device buzzed and whirred, its screen lighting up with fragments of text. "Balance. Energy. Unity," I read aloud. "It's a code. A riddle." The Guardians paused, their lights dimming as if waiting for me to act. The symbol below the core began to shift, its quadrants spinning slowly, each glowing brighter as they aligned. I studied it, piecing together the pattern. 4 quadrants, 4 elements. Energy flows from one to the next, creating balance. It clicked. I reached for the translator, inputting the sequence I'd deciphered. The moment I hit the final key, the symbol erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The Guardians let out a harmonious hum, their bodies glowing brighter than ever. The core pulsed, its energy radiating outward in a wave that sent ripples through the water. The light faded and the Guardians retreated, their forms dissolving into the depths. The core hovered silently, its surface calm once more. I stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what I'd just done settling in. I'd passed the trial. But what did that mean? The core pulsed again, softer this time, and the image of the ancient object buried beneath the ocean floor returned to my mind. It was clearer now, its details sharper. The core wasn't just showing me, it was guiding me. "All right," I said, stepping back to the wheel. "Let's see where this rabbit hole goes." The boat began to move, drawn by the core's energy. The water around me shimmered with light, the ocean itself coming alive as the core led me deeper into the abyss. The trial was over, but the real journey was just beginning. What do you think, folks? Did I make the right call trusting the core's test? Or should I have fought my way out? Let me know before we dive into Chapter 10, where the truth behind the core's purpose and my role in it begins to unravel. The boat moved effortlessly, pulled by an invisible current deeper into the ocean's embrace. The core's light pulsed steadily now, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Whatever lay ahead, I had the sinking feeling that this was the point of no return. As we descended further into the abyss, the water around the boat began to change. It shimmered with bioluminescent life, creatures unlike anything I'd ever seen, their translucent forms glowing in hues of blue, green, and violet. They didn't seem bothered by the core's presence. If anything, they thrived on its energy. The sight was mesmerizing, but it also reminded me of just how alien this world beneath the waves truly was. Humanity might think it rules the earth, but down here, we were strangers. The core slowed, its light dimming as we approached a massive structure buried in the seafloor. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a natural formation, it was a construct. Towering spires of obsidian-like material jutted out at impossible angles, their surfaces etched with glowing symbols that matched the ones I'd seen during the trial. The core hovered above the structure, its energy illuminating the details. This was the object it had shown me, the key buried in the ocean. But now that I was here, I realized it wasn't just a key, it was a gate. I climbed onto the bow of the boat, staring down at the alien construct. The symbols glowed brighter as the core pulsed, the two entities resonating with each other. It was like watching a conversation unfold in a language I couldn't understand. "What is this place?" I muttered. though the core wasn't likely to answer. And yet it did. Images flooded my mind, sharper and more vivid than before. I saw a vast network of similar constructs, scattered across the galaxy, each one linked to a core. They were repositories of knowledge, power, and balance, designed by an ancient civilization to maintain order. But something had gone wrong. A shadow fell across the images, a dark, consuming force that corrupted the balance, turning the tools of creation into weapons of destruction. The civilization that had built the cores was gone, wiped out by their own hubris. Now, the constructs remained as remnants of a forgotten era, waiting for someone, or something, worthy to take up their mantle. The core pulsed again, and the structure below responded, its spires shifting and rearranging themselves. A central chamber opened, revealing a pathway leading into the depths of the construct. "Well, I guess that's my invitation," I said, grabbing the destabilizer and strapping it to my back. If the core had gone to all this trouble to bring me here, I wasn't about to turn back now. I climbed over the side of the boat, slipping into the water. The glow from the core and the construct lit the way as I swam toward the open chamber. The water was warm, almost comforting, as if the construct itself was alive and welcoming me inside. The chamber was massive, its walls lined with more glowing symbols that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a smaller sphere, similar to the core, but dimmer, less alive. I approached cautiously, my every instinct screaming at me to stay on guard. As I reached the pedestal, the core's light flared, filling the chamber with a blinding brilliance. The smaller sphere began to glow, its energy syncing with the core's. Then a voice, clear and resonant, filled the space. "Captain Rogers, the time has come to choose." I froze, my hand hovering over the smaller sphere. "Choose what?" I asked aloud. "To restore balance or to unleash chaos?" The voice replied. "The power of the core can reshape worlds, but it is not without cost. Will you wield it wisely, or will you repeat the mistakes of those who came before?" The weight of the question hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't even about Earth. It was about the future of everything the core had touched, and everything it ever would. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. "The gate will close and the core will return to its slumber. But the imbalance will remain, and the consequences will be yours to bear." "And if I say yes?" The voice paused, as if considering its answer. "Then you will become its custodian, the bearer of infinite energy, the guardian of balance. But know this, the burden is eternal, and the power comes with sacrifice." I stared at the glowing sphere, its light casting shifting patterns across the chamber walls. The core's voice echoed in my mind, calm but unrelenting. "Restore balance or unleash chaos." The weight of those words bore down on me like the ocean itself. What would you do, folks? Could you trust yourself with infinite power, knowing the stakes? Or would you walk away, leaving the fate of the world, and maybe the galaxy, in someone else's hands? I wasn't sure if I was ready to answer those questions, but I knew one thing for certain. There wasn't much time left to decide. The chamber trembled as the core pulsed again, its energy resonating with the smaller sphere on the pedestal. The construct around me was alive, a machine and organism fused into one, and it wasn't just waiting, it was urging me forward. "The choice is yours, Captain Rogers. But know this, hesitation invites decay." Decay. The word hit me harder than I expected. Images flashed through my mind again, an Earth choked by rising tides, ecosystems collapsing, nations at war over dwindling resources. The core wasn't just a relic of some ancient civilization. It was a lifeline, a way to prevent the same mistakes from consuming us all. But could I be trusted with that kind of responsibility? Or would I become just another cog in the cycle of hubris and destruction? I reached out, my hand trembling as it hovered over the smaller sphere. Its surface pulsed gently, almost reassuringly, as if it could sense my doubt. "What happens to me if I take this?" I asked. The core's voice softened, almost compassionate. "You will be transformed. Your mind will expand, your body will endure. You will become one with the network, a custodian of its knowledge and power. But you will no longer belong to yourself. And if I don't, the core will return to its slumber. The imbalance will worsen. Others will come, and the choice will be theirs. I clenched my fists, the weight of the decision crushing me. If I refused, I could walk away, live my life, and hope someone stronger, wiser, more capable would come along. But hope wasn't enough, was it? Not anymore. I placed my hand on the sphere. The moment I made contact, a surge of energy coursed through me, blinding and overwhelming. The chamber dissolved into light, and I felt myself unraveling, my thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then, just as suddenly, everything fell into place. I was no longer in the chamber. I was everywhere, connected to a vast network of energy and knowledge that stretched across the stars. I saw worlds I couldn't have imagined, civilizations thriving in harmony with their cores, and others destroyed by greed and ambition. I understood now what it meant to be a custodian. The power wasn't just a gift. It was a responsibility, a balancing act between creation and destruction, preservation and progress. The core hadn't chosen me because I was perfect. It had chosen me because I was willing to try. When the light faded, I found myself back in the chamber, though it looked different now. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, their patterns shifting in time with my heartbeat. The smaller sphere was gone, absorbed into me, its energy a part of my very being. The core pulsed softly, its light warm and steady. The balance is restored for now, but the burden is yours to carry, Captain Rogers. Use it wisely. The boat surfaced hours later, emerging into a calm, moonlit ocean. The stars above seemed brighter, closer, as if the universe itself had shifted. I stood on the deck, feeling the hum of the core's energy within me. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also right. The world didn't know it yet, but things were going to change. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something better. A chance to make a difference, a chance to set things right. The ocean was unnaturally calm as the boat drifted toward the horizon, its engine quiet, as if even the machinery could sense the change. The core's energy thrummed within me, a constant reminder of the choice I'd made. I wasn't the same man who had set out on this journey. The world felt different now too, larger, more fragile, and infinitely more complicated. The first sign of change came just before sunrise. The waters beneath the boat shimmered with faint light, waves glowing as if the ocean itself had absorbed the core's energy. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The world was already responding to the balance I'd restored. But balance, as I was beginning to understand, wasn't a permanent state. It was a delicate dance, one that required constant vigilance. The core's voice echoed in my mind, a steady presence guiding my thoughts. The balance is restored, but the work is only beginning. Others will come. They always do. It didn't take long for the world to notice. By the time I reached the coast, news of strange phenomena had spread like wildfire. Ocean temperatures stabilizing in regions affected by climate change. Entire ecosystems recovering in weeks instead of years. Even seismic activity had diminished, as if the planet itself was healing. But the anomalies also drew attention. Scientists, governments, corporations, all scrambling to understand what was happening. And somewhere in the chaos there were whispers of something deeper, rumors of a power source unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They didn't know about the core yet, but they would. And when they did, they'd come for it, just like Elias had. I kept a low profile, blending into the chaos as best I could. The core's energy gave me clarity, but it also set me apart. I could feel it, a growing distance between myself and the people around me. They didn't see the world the way I did anymore, couldn't feel the pulse of the universe that now resonated through every cell in my body. I was different, and I was alone. Weeks turned into months, and the world continued to change. Humanity thrived in ways it hadn't in decades, but the greed that had driven Elias and his crew was never far behind. Corporations began launching deep-sea expeditions, searching for the source of the anomalies. Nations argued over territorial waters, each claiming a piece of the ocean's newfound wealth. They didn't understand. The core wasn't a resource to be exploited. It was a force to be respected, balanced, and it wasn't theirs to take. One night, as I stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Pacific, the core's voice spoke again, softer this time, almost mournful. They will come, and you must choose again. What if I make the wrong choice? I asked aloud, the words carried away by the wind. The core didn't answer, but it didn't need to. I already knew the truth. The burden wasn't just about power or responsibility. It was about sacrifice. To protect the balance, I'd have to stand against anyone who threatened it, even if it meant standing alone. As dawn broke over the ocean, I felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. The core had chosen me, not because I was the strongest or the smartest, but because I was willing to fight for something greater than myself. And as the first rays of sunlight painted the water in shades of gold and blue, I made a promise, to the core, to the world, and to myself. No matter what came next, I wouldn't let the balance fall. What do you think, folks? Should we explore how the world reacts to the core's presence in the final chapters, or dive deeper into the challenges I'll face as its custodian? Let me know as we move into Chapter 13, where the stakes reach their peak and the final pieces of the puzzle come together. The ocean's surface shimmered in the morning light, calm and radiant, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. But beneath the tranquility, a storm was brewing, one I couldn't ignore. Humanity was waking up to the anomalies, the sudden changes in the planet's rhythm, and they were asking questions. Questions I couldn't let them answer. The news was everywhere. Unexplained ecological recoveries, unprecedented marine phenomena, and whispers of deep-sea expeditions uncovering artifacts that defied understanding. Governments and corporations were mobilizing, each one desperate to get ahead of the others. And somewhere in the shadows, I could feel it. Something darker, hungrier, closing in. It didn't take long for my name to resurface. The Eurybia incident was too big to bury completely, and now, with the world's focus on the oceans, people were starting to connect the dots. I couldn't hide forever, and frankly, I didn't want to. I decided to make my move before they did. I reached out to an old contact, a journalist named Marianne Voss. She'd covered some of my more controversial missions back in my military days and had a knack for sniffing out the truth. If anyone could help me control the narrative, it was her. "Rogers," she said, her voice crackling over the encrypted line. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," I replied. "But if we don't talk soon, the world might wish I was." We met in a small diner off the beaten path, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Marianne looked older, more tired, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You're not here for coffee," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's going on?" I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this table, not until I say so. Understand?" She nodded, her curiosity outweighing her caution. "Talk." I told her everything. The core, the Guardians, the trial, the gate. I left nothing out, knowing she'd see through me if I did. By the time I finished, her expression was a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. This is real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As real as it gets," I said. "And if we don't handle it carefully, it could destroy everything." Marianne agreed to help, but we both knew it wouldn't be easy. The truth about the core was too big, too dangerous to reveal outright. We needed to control the story, to redirect the world's focus away from the core and onto something else, something they could handle. While Marianne worked her magic in the media, I turned my attention to the expeditions. Reports were flooding in about teams disappearing, equipment failing, and strange phenomena driving people mad. The core wasn't just sitting back, it was defending itself. But its defenses weren't perfect, and the wrong hands were getting too close. The breakthrough came when Marianne intercepted a classified report from one of the expeditions. A team had discovered another core construct, smaller than the one I'd seen but no less significant. They were trying to extract it, to harness its energy, and it wasn't going well. I knew what I had to do. "You're not seriously thinking about going there," Marianne said when I told her my plan. "They'll be expecting someone like you." "Good," I said, strapping the destabilizer to my back. "Let them expect me." The construct was deep in the Pacific, surrounded by a fleet of ships bristling with high-tech equipment. They'd set up a perimeter, their lights cutting through the darkness like searchlights in an endless void. I approached under cover of night, slipping through the water with the core's energy guiding me. I could feel its pull, stronger than before, as if it recognized the threat and was calling for help. When I reached the site, the scene was worse than I'd imagined. The construct was glowing erratically, its energy unstable. The expedition team had drilled into its outer shell, trying to access its core, and in doing so, they'd triggered a reaction. The ocean around the construct churned with an unnatural force, waves crashing against the ships. The air crackled with electricity, and the crew shouted in panic as their instruments failed one by one. I didn't have much time. Climbing onto the nearest ship, I made my way to the command center, where a group of scientists and soldiers were huddled around a monitor. "You've got to shut this down," I said, bursting into the room. They turned, startled, and one of the soldiers raised his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" "The guy who's going to save your lives," I said, stepping forward. "But only if you listen." The lead scientist, a woman with sharp features and a haunted look in her eyes, held up a hand. "Wait, I've seen him before. He's the one from the Eurybia report." "That's right," I said. "And if you keep poking at that thing, you're all going to end up like the rest of them." The room fell silent as my words sank in. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons still trained on me, while the scientists looked torn between skepticism and fear. The lead scientist stepped forward, her expression hardening. "And why should we trust you?" she asked. "This could be the most important discovery in human history, and you want us to walk away?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "Because if you keep pushing, you won't live to write about it. I've seen what happens when the core is mishandled. Your equipment is already failing. That's your first warning." Before she could argue, the construct let out a deep, resonant hum. The ship groaned under the force of the vibrations, the lights flickering. Outside, the water churned violently, glowing with the same unstable energy I'd seen before. "This isn't just a machine," I continued. "It's alive, and it's connected to something far bigger than you realize. If you don't back off, it's going to tear everything apart." The lead scientist hesitated, her eyes darting to the monitors displaying chaotic readings. "If you're right, then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You have to shut it down. Pull your team back, leave the construct alone. Let me handle this." The soldier nearest to me raised his weapon again. "And what exactly are you going to do?" "Blow it up?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm going to stabilize it." The construct let out another pulse, this one stronger, shaking the entire vessel. The soldiers stumbled, their weapons clattering to the floor, and the scientists scrambled to secure their equipment. I used the distraction to move past them, heading toward the deck where the construct loomed in the distance. The lead scientist followed me, shouting over the chaos. "If you can stabilize it, why haven't you already?" "Because it requires a connection," I said, glancing back at her. "The core chose me, but it doesn't trust you, or anyone else here." She stopped in her tracks, realization dawning on her face. "You're connected to it," I nodded. "And that connection might be the only thing that can stop this." The construct's energy flared as I approached, its symbols glowing brighter, their patterns shifting erratically. I could feel the core's presence growing stronger, its voice resonating in my mind. "The imbalance is great. Restore it, or all will fall." I climbed into the water, the destabilizer strapped to my back humming faintly. The glow from the construct surrounded me as I swam toward the central chamber. My heartbeat synced with the energy pulses, a strange calm settling over me despite the chaos. As I reached the chamber, the core's voice grew louder, more urgent. "The gate is fragile. Restore the sequence." The symbols shifted again, and I realized what I needed to do. The core was giving me the solution, but the process would require precision and sacrifice. I activated the destabilizer, its beam locking onto the construct's central node. The energy began to stabilize, the chaotic pulses smoothing into a steady rhythm. But as the construct calmed, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, stronger than anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't just stabilizing the construct, it was pulling me in. The scientists and soldiers watched from the ship as the glow intensified, the water erupting in a column of light. I heard their shouts, but their voices were drowned out by the cores. The burden is eternal. Will you accept it? I closed my eyes, my body trembling under the weight of the core's energy. This was it, the final choice. To let go and risk the collapse of everything, or to embrace the core fully, becoming its custodian in every sense of the word. I accept, I whispered. The moment I spoke the words, the light engulfed me. I felt my body dissolve, my consciousness expanding beyond anything I could have imagined. I was no longer just Captain Rogers. I was part of the core, connected to the network of constructs across the galaxy. I saw everything, the rise and fall of civilizations, the choices that shaped their fates. I understood the balance now, the delicate dance that held everything together, and I knew my role in preserving it. When the light faded, the construct was calm, its energy stable. The scientists and soldiers stood in stunned silence as I emerged from the water, the glow of the core still faintly visible in my eyes. What happened? The lead scientist asked, her voice trembling. It's over, I said, my voice steady. The construct is stable, but you need to leave it alone. This power isn't ours to control. And you? She asked. What are you now? I looked at her, feeling the weight of the core's presence within me. A guardian. The expedition retreated, their ships vanishing into the horizon. I stayed behind, watching the construct sink slowly into the ocean, its light dimming as it returned to its slumber. The core was safe, for now. But I knew this was just the beginning. Humanity's curiosity wouldn't stop, and others would come, drawn by the same desire for power that had nearly destroyed us. The core had chosen me to protect the balance, to ensure that its power wasn't abused. It was a lonely path, but it was one I was willing to walk. As I stood on the edge of the world, staring out at the endless ocean, I felt a strange sense of peace. The burden was heavy, but it was mine to bear. And as long as I had breath in my body, I wouldn't let the balance fall. Until next time, folks, stay curious. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of something bigger than you can understand, remember this. Sometimes, the greatest power is knowing when to let go. And with that, the story ends. But the journey continues. What did you think? Did Captain Rogers make the right call?